Atlanta.
Them belly full, but we hungry.
Mango's Caribbean Restaurant, open daily from 11 a.m. to 10 p.m. And on Friday and Saturday, we're open till 4 a.m. Come to Mango's and put some spice in your life.
Oh, we've got a good thing going.
Mango's Caribbean Restaurant, 180 Auburn Avenue, right next to Royal Peacock in downtown Atlanta. For more info or directions, call 404-698-3992 or log on to mangoscaribbeanrestaurant.com. For instant coupons, text MANGOS to 313131.
Tell your mama hungry, papa hungry, brother hungry.
Mango's Caribbean Restaurant, authentic Caribbean cuisines.
Open up the door, tell your mama hungry.
Let's face it, shopping for insurance can be time-consuming. That's why when it comes to your auto, home, and life insurance needs, make things simple and trust the experts at Allstate. They will help you get the coverage that fits your needs while helping you bundle your life, home, and auto policies. Bundling saves you money, sure, but it also saves you time, so you can enjoy the things that matter most even more. Contact me, Tammy Haynes, your local agent, for a free personalized insurance quote. Allstate, are you in good hands?
Creole seasoning is a sodium-free and sugar-free blend that's versatile enough to put on anything. One of the first blends I developed more than 8 years ago, the Creole seasoning has an unmistakable aroma, a bold flavor, and a little heat for character. Every time I open one of these bottles, I hear trumpets and big band music.
For my people that don't get to see me, trying to remind you who you are, just like in Romans 3. See, we about to blow across the world just like a day that's breezy. This motivation for the people and this classic Bible teaching say, make this for my people that don't get to see me, trying to remind you who you are, just like in Romans 3. See, we about to blow across the world just like a day that's breezy. This motivation for the people and this classic Bible teaching, hey, 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 motivation.
The Cavil Group is a Florida-based marketing and training consulting firm. We help businesses communicate to their target audience and engage them in conversation. We also help to expand their audiences, which will ultimately result in growth for those organizations. In addition to being a certified constant contact specialist, my colleagues and I are also certified in John Maxwell Leadership Principles. We use these proven principles to conduct workshops, training, and private coaching sessions for individuals and companies looking to take things to the next level. Contact us to schedule a free consultation. Issues today, don't delay, call Cavil.
It's like a loop machine. All around town, people trying to get down.
The human voice has always connected audiences with experiences. Major brands all across America have trusted Kever's voice time and time again. Conversational, powerhouse, intelligent, and sincere. That's the voice you need for your creative marketing process. KEAVERSVOICE.com. Kever's Voice, Kever's Voice, KeversVoice.com. Always on, all the time.
Now you can live in Texas and not have a good red meat blend. Texas Cowboy Dust is designed for steak and other red meats. It's out to be my most popular spice blend, made with onions, peppers, ground mushrooms, pink salt, and other spices. Texas Cowboy Dust also goes great with chicken, pork, vegetables, and adds a restaurant quality sheen to gravies and sauces.
Majesty is a premium health and wellness tea line focused on bringing delicious yet healthy tea blends to the community. Filled with an abundance of vitamins and antioxidants, we work to blend teas with exotic spices and fruits to produce scrumptious and wholesome beverages. So check us out at mymajesties.com. That's MyMajesties.com. My Majesties, an Urban Passport member.
Yeah. I hope I seen that 1-1, yeah. I hope I seen that 1-1, yeah. I tune into the HBCU SportsLab and see my team run along. If they lost, I'm quiet as a mouse. But if they won, too bad. I'ma do the dab, yeah. That's the real. You know what he be talking about. Talking about talk. They know what they be talking about. They can touch the analytic data with your real rock. If you know them like I know them, they gon' tell you the team if they want to love that. So listen to Professor. Yes, sir. And pay attention. Boy, we gon' do the lesson. And you gon' learn today. You gon' learn today. How to do the play, play the play. How they play, boy. You gon' learn today. How to play the play. How they play, play. Do weapons in the sweat. Let me out. Yeah, let me say. What's up to Tennessee State? Tune into the HBCU football. With Dr. Cavil. Michael Tom. Yes. Yeah. I love my HBCU. And boy, I love it. I love my HBCU. I hope my team that won, yeah. 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 I tune into the HBCU SportsLab to see my team run along. If they lost, I'm quiet as a mouse. But if they won,
I got you.
I'ma do the dab, yeah. That's the real. You know what he be talking about. Talking about talk. They know what they be talking about. They can set the analytic data with your real rock. If you know them like I know them, they gon' tell you the team if they want to love that. So listen to Professor. Yes,
go with the blue jeans off. Okay.
Boy, he gon' do the lesson. And you gon' learn today. How you do they play. How they play, boy. You gon' learn today. How you play. How they play. Do weapons in the sweat. Get me out. Here, let me say. What's up to Tennessee State? Tune into the HBCU football. With Dr. Cavil. Michael Tom.
This is Dr. Cavil with Inside the HBCU SportsLab. Glad that you joined us today with Dr. Cavil's Inside the HBCU SportsLab with Mike Washington and Charles Bishop. As you see, we're holding on for Mike to join us. He's probably doing a little bit of, as he says, that ghost work. We'll see if he's going to follow up with us today or he's going to beg forgiveness and say that he was on assignment. You know how it gets with everybody around these parts. So, just giving you a little love there as we bring it to you. This is Dr. Cavil Inside the HBCU SportsLab with Mike Washington and Charles Bishop, presented by THG Agency. Welcome and thanks for joining us inside the HBCU Sports Lecture Hall, the HBCU Sports Lab, for the only weekly sports talk radio show that is dedicated to exploring the sporting HBCU diaspora, including the marching sport with its unique HBCU cultural identity, the teams, the bands, coaches, athletic directors, commissioners, provosts, presidents, big rivalry matchup, classic games, and homecoming events, and much, much more from the HBCU athletic aesthetics. As we merge our lecture with sports business practices in the competitive sports industry, the show seeks to provide innovative, informative, progressive dialogue about the week's HBCU sporting events, issues, and ideas from a fan's perspective. Of course, we review the Southwestern Athletic Conference, better known as SWAC, the Mid-Eastern Athletic Conference, better known as the MEAC of the NCAA Division I Conference, Southern Intercollegiate Athletic Conference, SIAC, the Central Intercollegiate Athletic Association, the CIAA of the NCAA Division II, Gulf Coast Athletic Conference, GCAC of the NAIA, and independent programs such as Tennessee State of the OVC, Hampton of the Big South, Langston of the Sooner Athletic Conference, along with Texas College as affiliate member, as well as Edward Waters College as they transition from NAIA to NCAA Division II of membership in the SIAC. I am Dr. Kenyatta Cavil, aka the Dean of College of HBCU Sports. With that, without further ado, as we get it going from that perspective and everything, as y'all hear a little bit of background with Mike trying to set up there, we're going to jump right into it and make sure we get Charles to provide us with a little bit of news of the day.
Sure thing, Dr. Cavil. And we start off, and I think we're going to see a lot of these press releases over the next couple of weeks. But Grambling State, they unveiled their plan to gradually reopen today, and this comes to us from our friends from HBCU Game Day, where today Grambling State announced plans to gradually resume on-campus work for team members beginning June 2020. Details of the university's multi-phase reopening approach and new safety protocols will be made available to the employees in the coming weeks. So this is a quote from President Rick Gallo. Taking this gradual approach to bring teams back campus for work will help us ensure that every single team member becomes familiar with new campus-wide safety procedures. As these safety protocols become normalized on campus, we hope need for them will subside as we near the fall semester and welcome back our students. But Dr. Bill, the university has plans to implement such practices as mandatory temperature scans and predetermined medical checkpoints, as well as use of face masks, hand sanitizing stations, and limited building entry points across campus. So those are a few of the items that Grambling State laid out today in terms of getting back to some sense of normalcy with safety protocol.
No doubt about it. I think it's interesting when you talk about the fact that you have Grambling talking about making their measures of coming back to campus. The first school that I noticed out of the SWAC that did that was Prairie View A&M University about 2 weeks ago. They set up their framework in regards to coming back on campus. It was part of a system measure, as Texas A&M system said that all the Texas A&M institutions within the system would be coming back, and they had this 3 approach that you all see, and you'll start seeing that carry along across the different member institutions, including those in terms of the SWAC. Also, the second one that I know, because I'm a part of it, is Texas Southern University. They also put out a memo ascension that they would do this 3 component approach to bring institutions back in regards to do it, and now we see Grambling is talking about bringing them in. I've seen this also for schools outside of that, as I said, the Texas A&M system, all those schools, College Station, saw this University of Houston. So it's going to be interesting that we're starting to see this phased approach in terms of the 3 system approach. Did you see how they broke down the Grambling's 3 components approaches of how they would bring people back? Did they provide that information in their release?
Not in the release initially. I'm sure over the next week or so you'll find out more information in regards to how they're going to go about doing that. So
yeah, one of those all these schools in terms of approaches is that you'll have this first approach where you're bringing at essentially what you heard going into this is that you'll have the first line of individuals, what they call basically essential employees. They'll be the first group to come back. Then the second group, as they come in a little later, they'll have this phase approach where you have the next group, which are essentially faculty. From that perspective, some additional staff people will come back as well. And then finally, you'll have the next final approach where you'll see students coming in. And so there's an approach, but it's still interesting to me because there's still a lot of talk on the table in regards to essentially when the actual fall semester will begin. There's conversations out there, will it start as late as October? Will it end over in terms of early as Thanksgiving in terms of that process? I think there was a release from University of Texas out there talking about that they're planning to schedule students to leave as early as Thanksgiving. And then you have the approach where you're hearing, as we said, from a national perspective, taking us back to HBCU and Howard University's president, said they might start as late as October. I've also heard certain reports in terms of athletic director, Southern University, on a framing that I thought where he was looking at maybe He was concerned that the first part of the season, September, was not likely to start athletics, and his best guess was to see it possibly as early as October from that perspective. So let's look at it there from that perspective. And I'd like for you, Charles, to share with me, what are your thoughts in terms of what's going on there?
Well, I think, I think everybody has mentioned from the top that safety is of the utmost, and you can see that there has been a lot of thought that has gone into the safety protocols that are going to go in place in accordance with state guidelines, CDC guidelines. We're more or less kind of preparing for a brave new world here in terms of getting back to the fall semester, and still waiting to see whether we will have fall sports going forward, to see if all those sort of safety meshes and protocols come to play so that everybody can get back to some sense of what would be our new normal.
Yeah, no doubt about it. With that, we'll probably have Mike jumping in here soon in regards as he gets hooked up, crossing over from Blue Jeans to Zoom. So we'll have both going on so individuals can hear us live on the radio in terms of the Blue Jeans component of it, and then bringing Mike on to the Zoom. So I just sent him that link, so look for him to come on in there. But with that component, when you start looking at how it's going to be intriguing of just what this is looking like, and one of the things that personally concerns me, which is the opposite of what you look at from a conference perspective, is that the governors, you're not getting this from the federal component.
Right.
Let's just be very open with that. You're not getting any across the board framing or best practices other than the federal government saying that they're going to leave it up to individual states.
Right.
Well, we know when you look at conferences, for the most part, especially at the Division I level and above, you have some Division II conferences, if you look at it, that have the perspective where you have all conferences from one state. You've seen that with the state California institutions, where you've seen the state California institutions, and therefore the conference moved that they would do without fall sports, that they counseled fall sports not only from the California state institutions, but from a conference perspective as well. Well, for the most case, at the Division I levels, conferences are cut across different states, and many of them are contiguous, where they're some similar in terms of boundaries connecting each other, but that at best is what you see there. So from that perspective, I think it's very intriguing of how you're going to essentially have governors providing a context about how they want states to move forward. And obviously, state institutions are going to follow that. But what happens when you get in some of these conferences, if you would, where you have private schools as members too? Now, when you're looking at it in terms of the SWAC, obviously, it's not that complicated because all the member institutions are at least state institutions. So you're worried about it just from a state perspective in terms of what's going on there. So I frame all that to say that you have a governor in the state of Louisiana that is implementing stay-at-home orders that are still moving forward. Obviously, in Texas, you had one of the first states outside of South Carolina and Georgia where we don't have member schools to say, let's move forward and open things up.
Right.
Mississippi, I'm not sure if they ever closed anything down. Alabama's on a different framework. I'm sorry to do that to you, Charles, but hey, I call it like I see it.
I mean, it is what it is.
Have Arkansas, right?
Right.
In terms of what's going on there. So you got all these moving parts. And then as a conference commissioner, you're trying to align with what you traditionally do with athletics, then allowing your presidents that are governed by these legislative state boards and bodies from a public perspective that needs funding, and you have these governors saying, open this thing up. So you have everybody in a lot of places, a little bit of everywhere. So it's going to be fascinating to see how that goes on. With that, Charles, I'm going to get your comments on that, and then we'll bring Mike in to bring in and show his thoughts in terms of what's going on there as he looks like he's set up and ready to go. I see him with his board back there, Prairie View's clean shaven. He look like he got fired up for us there. But what are your thoughts in terms of all these things playing out at that level of just how complicated this can become? Whether it is, we'll see if that makes any difference. But what are your thoughts on that, Charles? And then I would like to get Mike's thoughts on that as well.
I mean, I think, like you said, it's very complicated, and you wish that there was a sort of a top-down approach from the federal level to the state level to give guidance. But it looks as though that, sad to say, that it's like fend for yourself sort of a situation to where you're asking states to kind of figure it out as you go. We're opening it up, so and it's I'm sure very frustrating.
I laugh because, as you said, it's frustrating in a lot of ways, but it seems what it is. Just say, y'all get it how you live.
Right.
We talk about these hip hopster and rap music out there. In a lot of ways, man, it doesn't get too much truer than that. They talking about, hey, man, get it how you live. Conferences, states, businesses, however y'all come to it and y'all want to make it work, we'll give you some frameworks, but outside of that, do what you do. Hopefully it works out. Don't get caught, and we'll see what happens.
Yeah, well, basically, you get to that point. We'll see what happens, and we're going to hope for the best. So, that's a very frustrating thing that I think for policymakers, your presidents, to try to take that sort of, attitude and move forward as best they can. So that's unfortunate, and you hope that people make the right decisions as we go forward, as we go from May into June and into July, and hopefully, things progress to a point to where you can make a little more clear decisions. But in the interim, decisions have to be made to even get to that point. So it's very frustrating. If I was, a president or a policymaker of some sort, I just would love to have a little more direction moving forward.
Certainly, and we'll get a chance to get into a little bit of this APR as it's coming up. But I really think this is important for us to take this deep dive. Now, I want to frame you that I think some decisions will be made, but I'm not sure how. While a lot of it will deal with the health, there's going to be some other factors that really are going to help make that decision. With that, before I share that, I want to get Mike's thoughts, and then I'll come back with a different framing of that, and then we can open it up for some more news of the day. But Mike, in terms of you hearing what we discussed then on Grambling now opening and putting in his three-phase approach, we talked about Prairie View kind of leading it off, Prairie View under the Texas A&M system that put the information about how they would do this phase approach, and then Texas Southern came on board, did their phase approach, and things are still up in the air and still updating, but they did, and at least have put that out there. Mike, what are your thoughts on all this?
So I heard Charles mention no top-down approach. I doubt that there's harmonization across or consistency. Grambling State's phased approach may look different than Prairie View's phased approach, may look different than Jackson State's phased approach. I think as we go into this, we're still learning as we go. And we get to maybe July and we'll have a more informed decision. But as Charles mentioned, we have to make decisions to get to July. We don't know those. We're hinging those on basically what we're predicting. And there's concerns because you have different groups that you have to plan for in each phase. It's the same approach in government. It's the same approach in corporate America. The approach for students versus the approach for athletes versus the approach for faculty. How do you, the approach and the protection and the mitigation strategies is going to look different. And I hate to be in the president's shoes or the administrative staff, the decision maker's shoes, because they have public perception to deal with if their approach is not spot on point, if it's flawed. So it's almost a no-win situation. You're kind of looking into a crystal ball. Yes, you can have a phased approach, but who's to say that my phase 0 or my phase 1 works better than Grambling's phase 1 or phase 2? So
yeah, that's a great point. Yep.
Yeah.
So you would hope there's some kind of harmonization at least across the board. That's my concern. And what kind of mitigative strategies are they going to have in place? Even if we do see improvements, what protections, what mitigative strategies are going to be in place, and what's going to be consistent, at least across the SWAC.
Yeah, and when you see that and talk about their perspective, I think it's also going to be interesting from that perspective. Also, just understanding what's going on there in so many different ways, with the perspective that the NCAA has this governance that they put out there and these minimum requirements that they're saying that is governing all these organizations. And I think that's what's ultimately going to lead to a lot of the conferences making their decisions, especially those that are outside of the Power Five. When you take a look at all the requirements of what you're looking at in terms of that perspective, I think it obviously gets to the point that you're going to see a financial disposition take place. When you see the Power Fives with the television money they have the ability where they're going to be able to do similar what you see at the professional level, which I think is intriguing because those players are getting to negotiate how they get to operate carrying forward with this season. And you're not seeing that with the Power Five players. Essentially, unilaterally, you're having the athletic directors, VP of athletics, and the presidents, NCAA, for the most part, they're going to make this decision with little regard to players having input. Obviously, I'm sure they'll have some disposition of what they think and things of that nature, but I don't see them having a great deal of input in this. But based on these rules, you're talking about testing. And anybody knows about the testing component, there's a cost associated with the testing. One of the things that you hear a lot at the professional level, most recently with the NBA, one of the things that they have in regards to testing is not so much that they're prepared to do the testing and they financially can do the testing, is they're really concerned on the perception, if you would, in terms of what it looks like if they're paying for private testing and there's still concerns of what the public is able to get in terms of their testing.
Yeah.
Right? So there's this disposition that they're really concerned with the public's disposition, I would say, and their attitude in regards of them moving forward, participating in sports under what's necessary for them to do the testing and taking these first responders outside of how they should be caring for the public in a needs basis. And so you trickle that down to the NCAA, and let's say they're going to have to follow that model. But think about the cost associated with moving that all the way down to the FCS level.
Yeah.
And with the institutions responsible for paying that. So not that they wouldn't want to do the testing, not that they couldn't put a presentation together to do the testing from a conference perspective down to each institution, aligned for the most part with government. And when I say this, I'm talking about state government framework from the governors of how they should test people and make sure that people are within these spaces. The NFL talking about doing certain types of masks. Let's say that they can even put out plans to make sure their players, whether they're soccer, volleyball, right? In football, they have these masks, but think of all the cost associated with doing it. Where is that cost coming from? The NCAA wasn't able to do the fulfillment of NCAA basketball money, so they don't have the money, right?
Right.
They don't get any of the football money from the largest. Those goes to the Power Five school, right? The big, as we know, the big money for the NCAA is basketball money. So they don't get this football money that a lot of people talk about that generates so much. That essentially goes to the Power Five schools. They set it up where they do share some of it, but very small parts of it to the next five, and then even a smaller amount to some degree to the FCS. You're talking about the enrollment starting to dip potentially in terms of all institutions across the board. So that may be less money coming in for them to allocate to athletics, but you're needing more money. Sponsorships, you say, well, maybe sponsors could take care of this. You know, with the businesses trying to get back, how many of them are going to be in a position to allocate more money to sponsorship, especially money that they can't see a direct return, but know that they're going to get direct business from doing that sponsorship. So I asked the question in a lot of ways, where is this money going to come from associated with allowing these institutions, even if everything else works out, to come back? Who's going to pay for that money associated with making sure that you can participate with these fall sports, namely in the SWAC, football, volleyball, right, and women's soccer, right, in that capacity? Where is that money coming from is the question I want to put out there for those folks following this, and I'll check it with them. But with that, I want to give Mike a chance to give us some new HBCU news of the day.
All right. Well, switching gears here, and this is big in the lacrosse world. The head coach, Rashad DeVoe, for Hampton University Lacrosse has decided, and it's surprising a lot of folks, to leave and go coach for the University of Amherst. You'll recall that 2 weeks ago, Hampton scored a big recruit in the son of James Brown, Eris Brown. And Hampton is coming off of its most successful season at being 6-5. They were set to play the strongest D1 schedule that they played in the school's history since they started in 2016. Rashad is picked as he replaced the legendary Lloyd Carter. He is picked to take this team to that next level, and all of a sudden, unbeknownst to a lot of the staff, unbeknownst to a lot of alumni, he up and decides to leave the organization and go to the University of Amherst, which is a top-level D3 program, but he leads a D1 Hampton program, which is on the upswing. So that has surprised a lot of folks in the lacrosse world. Big surprise.
Wow. Yeah, you dug deep in it for that one, but I'm sure that certainly is a surprise. This short notice with everything going on. That's some good getting into the crates, Mike. What's going on there? With that, let me jump over here and shout out to some of these folks that's following us. Jimmy Wilson is on here. Carlos Brown. Willie Alex Hines jumped in here replying to Troy, talking about family. You might have something to say about that this year, as I'm sure the Aggies and the A&T folks are going at it strong already. So we popped off and kind of helped that last week as the VP of Intercollegiate Athletics threw out there and say we have already chased North Carolina A&T out of the conference. that man, that was big time.
I'm sure that went across real well.
Jimmy agrees with it. An extremely complex problem without federal leadership. J Max says, "Good evening, everyone." Anthony Weston says, "Bruh, we have to lead ourselves." I agree with that in a lot of ways in terms of HBCUs. And I think that's going to be a unique perspective. If you hadn't noticed, just chiming in with what Anthony's saying, I'm starting to see that refrain. I've heard Gramblin's AD come in here, Southern's AD on some shows. Alabama A&M AD was on different shows that I've heard. Alabama State's, and I've heard all of those come out with the same framework that their major decision process outside of making sure they got all the information is going to be about the safety of their college athletes, student athletes, right?
As well as should be.
The safety, which is different from what I've heard across the board with everybody talking about how they're going to start them off. And then their second component is about these safety measures. I hear safety first. And so it's going to be interesting to see from this HBCU disposition, is that going to be a larger frame, and how much is that going to play into them making that decision, no doubt. Jimmy says, not according to the events in Brazil, as things continue, yes, to get certainly out of hand there. And how is that going to play out? J-Max says no such thing, because you can get infected as soon as you walk away and contact the person that is contagious. That's another thing about the testing, exactly, which brings up just how often do you test. Last I was hearing, people were talking about, yeah, we could test, bringing them in Friday. We test before they go on the trip. We leave them in the hotel, and then we test before they play. And then immediately after the game, you test them again. So that's a lot of tests. Again, the question becomes: are you testing all this for these athletes, right? Which is good. You need to do that. But is this affecting those other individuals within society in terms of them getting tested? So, what is the cost associated with that?
I've always asked a question in terms of what if an athlete does contract COVID-19 during the course of the game or whatever the case might be. They're tested afterwards. I mean, is at that point is the team suspended for the rest of the season? Just what are the contingencies that happen? Should happen should somebody contract during the course of play. So I know we're extremely optimistic about playing and getting everything in, but I mean, I still have so many questions, and we seem to be moving at breakneck speed to get back to normalcy without answering some of these questions as we go along.
Those are very important questions he's talking about, and I've heard all kind of scenarios, so I don't think they've framed exactly what is going to happen. And again, I go back where you're getting most of your information from on a sporting perspective of who's leading is and who has the most financial ability to actually frame this in such a way that they can help make these decisions, right? Well, if you do it at that level, what you're hearing is the fact that they're talking about trying to create all these different measures such that there isn't a second breakout, because if you do, you essentially have this second stopping of the season. So it's my understanding, if you get some type of, even from those from the health perspective, Dr. Fauci, in terms of what he's talking about, one individual testing, he says you probably can move forward and feel comfortable that there's not much going on. But he certainly says when you get to 2, no question, once you get to 3, you can essentially assume that you have multiple other folks that are asymptomatic that have it too. So basically, you're at a point where all is lost, and you certainly have to shut it down. So those are the kind of questions, which brings us back to the fact of what you're hearing the NBA most recent decision is to put this containment, basically to put everybody in a bubble.
Right.
And so you've heard baseball talking about having maybe 3 different locations. The trouble with that is the more locations you have, which you see at the college level, each campus, right? The more locations you have, the more challenging it is to contain it. So that's why the most recent model you see from the NBA, and to some degree even the NHL, as they move to say that if they have a season, they're going to go straight to the playoff with 24 teams and expand it and just let everybody fight for what happens this year, is the NBA is talking about putting everybody at Walt Disney in a compound essentially and looking at having this bubble effect to protect everybody. So you're exactly right. There is a major concern in terms of how you manage that, which brings me back to Jimmy Wilson that asked the question, did the students of Liberty University drop their class action lawsuit versus the university? My last hearing on that is moving forward, but we all know in the court cases in the system that those things move pretty slow. So I hadn't heard any indication that was dropped, that it's moving forward. And you just kind of have to follow the backstory, and I'll look a little closer. So maybe next week we will give a different update. Anthony Weston chimes in and says the only thing we can really do is make sure our immune system is strong as possible. Certainly with the way things are opening up, that is one of the things that you can control personally, is to make sure that you're as healthy as possible. Because it's coming to the point that it is more likely that you're going to catch it than not, because of the way everything's open. And then if that's the case, you need to be in the best position to defend off this virus, which means you need to be as healthy as possible. And that's a whole different show in terms of immune frameworks of how you do that. But essentially, the latest report I heard, which is a concern to me, just to be frank with you, is your BMI. The higher your BMI, 35 and older, the more challenging it is for them at the hospital to provide you with the most up-to-date care needs you have, because your weight becomes a problem adjudicating the things that they want to do to help you get through the process of going through this virus. So that's another thing in terms of being healthy, all the additional things, but the weight part about it. Jimmy chimes back in, and he's frank about this, and I don't know if you can say it much better than this. The virus doesn't care. And it has no borders. It has no Republican, Democratic framework. It has no delineations of NCAA Power 5, Next 5, FCS Division 2, NAIA, HBCU, historically white colleges and universities, HWCU as I like to call them. Willie Alex Hines jumps back in here. Where money usually comes in our nation, out of thin air. That's pretty cool to hear that kind of take on it. Jimmy L. Wilson says a virus is not damaging when it attacks a strong immune system. That is true, but we know by the information out there that because of all these other disparities that ethnic groups, in terms of African Americans, right? Everybody else likes to use the racial lens of it. We know who is affecting the most because we are not necessarily the healthy because of different disparities that takes place. And I don't want to get in an argument in terms of whose fault that is or whatever, but we know it exists in terms of those things. Kimberly Runnels has jumped on here. PBAMU National Alumni Associated President is checking us out today. J-Mac, in terms continues to put it out there. Give a shout out to J-Mac. Go and check out his book that he's just recently reviewed of all the pictures that he's taken of HBCU classic and games over the year. I just ordered it, and so I'm excited for it to come in, and I'll give you a personal review, and maybe we can see to bring him on to get him to talk about that. Obviously, it's pictorial, so we might have to find a way to give him some tease as we go through our producer, Roy, to be able to get us some images up so we can do some pictures in terms of that and give him some love on that book, because I think it's going to be fascinating taking a pictorial historical look. As you know, I love history. Thomas White has jumped out here, Mogul Threads, as they continue to do it, and from his designer set. Got some surprises in the window. Look out. Dr. Cavil might decide to come out with his own line. Don't shake your head. If I do it, it's going to be nice. I tell you that much. Kim jumps back in here and says, hello, gentlemen. Can the test results become available that fast? That is a question, too, in terms of which test you take, how fast they can come back. And there's different dispositions, and there's different costs associated with the time on those in terms of how fast they can come back. So it's my understanding they can come back pretty fast, but there's a cost associated with that as well. So great point that you bring up, Anthony Weston. Some great dialogue and conversations coming about in terms of really understanding and taking this deep dive in a lot of ways of how this will look. Eric Caver has jumped on here and gave us some love. Amos Fawcett says, right, Charles, what are the contingencies going on? Amos Fawcett also says a team tests positive, will they be forced to forfeit? That's a significant question there. Is it a forfeit? Is it just a bye game? Will they try to reschedule it? How would that go? Students might have to sign a waiver. Yes, you can sign a waiver, but I can give you an update from a legal perspective on waivers. There's a question in terms of how much does a waiver protect folks? Right. I teach, as you know, Charles, in our sports law class, people do not realize when you sign these waivers for your youth sports that it's not even worth the paper you put on, because as an adult, you can't sign a waiver on a child. You can't legally do it.
Right.
So there's questions in terms of what rights can you ask. In a lot of ways, some people would say it would be forced in terms of the guidelines of NCAA, in terms of the waiver. Do you lose your scholarship if you don't sign the waiver? Do you are you not permitted to come into the institution with the waiver? What are the legal frameworks about there? And because this is new, there's no real obvious case study to show this. So some of this will just have to be litigated. So there's a question even how much a waiver would even work, just to make sure that we can put that out there in terms of the waiver. Great question, Jimmy Wilson. Anthony says, sure hope not. And you're right. There's a framing discussion on that. Athletes have contracted COVID-19. We know that for a fact. Got to get the skinny in terms of what that looks like. And so a lot going on here. Byron Gauthier, family rattler, frat brother there, A5A jumps in here. Is BMI still relevant? To some degree, it's one component that they still calculate, at least in terms of one measurement. Some people like to look at it differently because, probably to Byron's point, there's some biasness in terms of the BMI, in terms of how does it calculate it from one ethnic group to another. So these are significant questions that our smart viewers and watchers are bringing up. And I have to believe after having many conversations as a consultant with Charles, at least from one commissioner, talking to other ones as well, that I know that they're taking a deep dive in terms of this research. So these are significant stuff that they're not necessarily able to talk about, but it's certainly out there in a lot of ways. He's ready to join us so we can get that going as much. Most of our schools play our money games at the beginning of the season. Bama State plays Tuskegee in game 1, Texas Tech game 2. If we miss September, then we lose at least $1 million in revenue. No question about it. I talked about this on HBCU Game Day, BCSN Network. I talked about that. One of the first things I put out there, if there is no September and the money games are gone in terms of our classics early on in those money games, yes, you're easily talking about anywhere for at least $250,000 all the way up to $1 million, $1.2 million and a quarter in some cases of revenue lost that cannot be brought back. So when you start looking at that, is it even worth having a season in terms of the cost? So this continues to be something that we'll have to dialogue about it. J-Mac put a link to his book there, so check it out. Eric Caver says, if athletes are allowed back on June 1st, the intent is truly to start the season on time. I'm not sure about that, Eric. I think the intent is to continue to move forward. Yeah, I think they're going to put dispositions out there for that. And I think it is extremely important that there is one set of governing rules for everybody. But that doesn't mean that everybody has the ability to financially support the fact that somebody says that you can. The June 1st was a unilateral decision from multi-levels, particularly in the state of Texas, if you would, from the governor, to start saying that he's having this phased approach about opening things. And this is about schools opening. And I'll give you a very clear example. These institutions that we talked about, Prairie View A&M, Texas Southern University, and Grambling State talked about these phased approaches and open their campus at first to essential workers. Are you aware that this summer that students will not be back on campus? That there will still be a delivery of class content virtually online. Yep. So this is not just the go-ahead to move forward about having a season. And I cannot stress this enough, and I know we're a sports show, but a person that happens to be an academic professor and works intimately in a lot of ways with the administrators, and in some cases, some of the things I do is from an administrative perspective. I can tell you most assuredly that the first priority of these institutions is to make sure that classes are being held and that enrollment is in a position that they have a significant body of students on campus. Secondary, at best, is regarding athletic season. And I hate that for a lot of people because I know a lot of people just see sports as very important, and I'm not going to take that away from you. Obviously, we do a show about sports, but for me, it's bigger than that, and I'm going to always lead with the facts first and give you the information I have. That's the number one priority for HBCUs. If anything that you're going to do for your institutions is support them, is obviously continue to give, but one of the top priorities you need to have is the fact that you need to be pushing and recruiting for enrollment, whether it's that retention in students coming back and progressions. We already had that on the table. And freshmen coming in for the new class and enrollment going on. That's extremely important. We'll get back into some more of this dialogue a little bit as the time is getting ahead of us and getting past that in a lot of ways. I think we have a great conversation there. Any additional news that you wanted to put out there before we start talking about some of this APR, which I know has really driven a lot of the conversation this past week, particularly what happened to Prairie View A&M in that world, and even more so when you look at the fact that 8 of the violations were out there, as I talked about last week. 8 of the 10 were HBCU institutions that were hit with these APR sanctions. 2 of them were what I refer to, again, historically white colleges, and they happen to be out of the same conference in terms of Southland, which was McNeese State, and Stephen F. Austin, that was hit extremely hard in terms of their couldn't even have an academic review in terms of that data that we previously heard about from Southern, so we know how serious that is in a lot of ways. The other 8 institutions for HBCUs, 5 of them were from the SWAC, and 3 of them were from the MEAC. So you can see the distribution in terms of that. So I really wanted to get into some APR conversations, to at least break down how do you break down what the APR actually is, what it stands for, how do you calculate it. And then in addition to that, we'll have a chance maybe to circle back and get back into some more of the comments that are coming fast and furious for so many people that enter into this great dialogue about how we're moving forward with things starting to open up for our institutions that we generally heard about, and that Charles Bishop did a great job of breaking out the news of the day. Any additional news that you wanted to get out there hot and heavy in a lot of ways, Charles?
Yeah, real quick news that came out today, and I think, it kind of almost slid under the radar, but thanks to the guys at HBCU Game Day, 2019 CIAA Rookie of the Year running back Emmanuel Wilson is transferring from Johnson C. Smith to Fort Valley State. So if you know anything about Emmanuel Wilson, he was everything as a freshman last year.
Wow, that's big.
For Johnson C. Smith, he was a CIAA Rookie of the Year. He rushed for over 1,000 yards on only 159 carries, 13 touchdowns, and now he's taking his talents down to Georgia. And here's a quote, from him. He said, "I always heard about Georgia football, and I wanted to come to the South to play with better competition, and play with the best."
Wow. Shots fired from the CIAA to the SIAC. I would make the argument, though, that the CIAA has actually had a better top to bottom, particularly that Northern Division in terms of
Northern Division
programs over the last couple of years. If you measure it by playoff appearances, number of teams getting in, wins in the playoffs, if you would. Certainly, if you measure it in terms of what we refer to as the mid-major division, HBCU national championships over the last couple of years, they've all gone to the CIAA, but it's intriguing. SIAC for the longest has been what many people thought is the perennial football power, and maybe he's looking at more from a historical perspective, but it's fascinating to see that he put that out there, so it'll be interesting. I have to go check the schedule and see if there is a SIAC-CIAA matchup on Fort Valley's schedule, which make it just a little more interesting.
Yeah, it would.
In terms of it, too. Before I jump into this and kind of do our last 15 or so minutes on the APR, Mike, was there anything else that you wanted to share before we got into this APR academic progress rate discussion and report?
Yeah, one quick thing. It seems like COVID-19 has not stopped this transfer action either way. So it seems like Tennessee State has picked up some FBS talent. This comes to us, of course, from HBCU Game Day. They added basically 2 offensive player linemen, Davion Hawkins from Hollywood, Florida, and offensive lineman Mike Arnold from Winter Haven, Florida. So Hawkins comes to Tennessee State after spending 2 seasons at the University of Kentucky. And the defensive lineman redshirted his first season with the Wildcats and played in 9 games. And then, of course, you have Arnold, who spent 4 years at Florida State and who's transferring as a grad transfer. So it looks like Tennessee State is bringing some talent, at least to their squad, from the FBS levels. So that this COVID-19 does not stop this transfer action at all.
No, man. I see people are gearing up one way or the other. They're going to be excited. So it's going to be fascinating to see if we get a chance to see some of this play out. Big time moves for Tennessee State to see what they can do. Charles, what you got? You seem like you want to sneak something back in there.
Well, I had to point out something to my Tennessee State fans, because they get to, talking a little bit of noise about, we got another offensive lineman from the FBS school. This one comes from Florida State. True enough, but Florida State wasn't exactly known for the offensive line these past 3 years.
Woo! Southern Heritage smack talk going on there. I like a little bit that. Tennessee State, plug it away. Yeah. You need to get that in there for our Tennessee State fans. Make sure they understand. Yeah, I see that. I like that nice part of that. Let me jump in this APR and frame it for the discussions, and then we'll go back to see what people are saying in Facebook to kind of see where we want to go with that discussion. Want to continue the dialogue with everybody in there. And obviously, if we can't get it to on the show, we always go back during and after the show during the week to see if there's questions we can follow up on. So continue to put that information out there, and we'll see what we can provide you. Obviously, what we don't know, we'll tell you we don't know, and we'll see if we can find out from our sources to get you the information you need as we like to deliver on this show. Let me just frame this in a different way, that I am not an APR expert in terms of that, nor have I been trained in terms of the NCAA. I have had the opportunity to work with individuals that have been trained on APR and NCAA by the NCAA in various ways. I worked at Texas Southern University at the time when they had to go on essentially what many people saw as a death penalty framework of APR. And you'll hear me say APP because there is a component of that as well in terms of how they put it out there in a lot of ways. But want to give a shout out to Texas Southern University's Mike Maletta, who spent a lot of time with me that he hasn't had to in regards to making sure that I had a versatile framework of what APR is, and that's the framework that I'm coming from to share with my listeners, just so you all have a understanding of where I'm coming from with this information. Now, the academic progress rate, APR, and some of it I will read directly from the NCAA. We'll probably have a graphic we'll be able to show you directly from the NCAA, their website, to give you some perspective on doing the actual calculation that we'll give you, as well as the fact that you'll be able to see and hear us talk about the reference point where you can go do some back study and get it on yourself if you want to kind of follow up about that. So let's just start out with a definition. The academic progress rate is a measure introduced by the NCAA, National Collegiate Athletic Association. Obviously, you know, it's the nonprofit association that organizes athletic programs. Many of the NCAA colleges and universities. The other group mainly out there at the NAIA that you hear us talk about from HBCUs. There is another association, United States Intercollegiate Athletic Christian Association, that governs some athletic programs as well, just to be open and honest with that. It is measured term by term. And so when we say term by term, we're talking about from an academic framework. So that is usually semester to semester. And so we move from one semester to the next semester. For most of our schools, that's from fall to spring. You do have some institutions that still are on the quarterly semester, so it moves from that semester to the next semester. So that's why it says term by components of how the APR is calculated. One is called eligibility, which simply means, is a student eligible to participate in that term? And then they start having these heavy benchmarks to get there. Well, when we look at that in terms of the other measure, is retention. And it is basically just how you look at the acronym and how it breaks down. Retention. Do you retain a student? Does a student come back? Are they there in one semester, and do they come back for the next semester? Which is where you get in all this transfer information you have. So if a student transfer out, you're not going to get that point for your APR, no matter how high a GPA they had when they transferred out. No matter if they were eligible, you get that point, but you don't get the retention point. Now, there are some other measures they do where you can get some what they call these delayed points. If you can follow a student and make sure that he is going to another institution where they are calculating APR, if he does graduate, there's some ways that you can apply for these, what they call delayed graduation points, where you can move that back into your APR and have it calculated into your APR. So those are the two things that you're looking at, eligibility and retention. The other thing is important that this is a 4-year measure. So it is measured over 4 years to calculate one APR. So when you look at the APR this year, another part of it that you want to remember is like your taxes. Remember, you pay your taxes based on the preceding year. Well, APR is a review over 4 years, but it's over based on the 4 years based on the preceding year. So the APR that came out this year was based on last year and 4 years prior to last year to get the calculation that you see today. So the APR numbers for eligibility and retention that you see this year will actually be produced next year, and it will be based on the last 4 year preceding numbers. If you would, let's go ahead and bring up the chart that we want to show you in regards to what does this look like from a calculation perspective. There's a chart in terms of how APR is calculated. This is just a hypothetical, as they say. Division I football team has 85 members. So if you look at that perspective, you can look at the fall semester outcomes. Let's say on this football roster you have 75 players, right? And so again, you're looking at 2 points, one for eligibility, one for retention. So there's 2 of 2 that you can possibly get to calculate the APR of this football team. So it's simple multiplication. 75 times 2, 2 of 2, right? Means that the total value could get is 150 of 150 points for that particular APR. Let's say 3 players are retained for the spring semester but are academically ineligible. So that means you're only getting 1 point. They came back, but they were not eligible. They didn't do enough in class to make the eligibility mark, meaning that they were progressing towards their degree, hitting that 60, 90 degree mark. So it's 3 players. So you multiply your 3 players times 1, because you only got the 1. They retained. They were not eligible. You only got the 1. So 3 times 1 gives you 3 of 6. You could have got 6 total points for those players, but you only were able to get 3 because they were not eligible. Let's look at another example. 5 players leave the institution while academically eligible. Key words is not they left, but they were academically eligible when they left, meaning they were progressing towards their degree, right? So that's 5 players, so we would calculate 5. And again, you only got 1 of the 2 points you could get. So that's 5 times 1 of the 2 that you could get. And again, easy math, 5 times 1 equals to what? 5. But you could have gotten 10 points. So in those 2 cases, you had one where you got 3 of the 6 possible points. In the other case, you got 5 of the 10 possible points. Let's look at this third example that they give. 2 players leave the institution while academically ineligible. All this is really where all hell breaks loose, if you are from an academic institution. This is the worst thing that could happen to you. You have an institution where students leave, and when they left, they were not academically eligible. So if you have somebody in your compliance office that really looks at this level of detail, what you would go tell a coach at this point is that you can't sign a waiver for this student to leave. Now, they can leave, but they would not be eligible to replace somebody else. So you wouldn't sign the waiver. You would say, hey, you need to go to summer school. We'll pay for you going to summer school here. You go to summer school here, pass these classes. This will make you eligible. And then we'll sign a waiver so you can leave, which means you would be back in the slot above us where you at least get 1 of the points. But in this case, you have 2 players and neither of them are available. So that is 0. 0 of 2. You didn't get the eligibility point, and obviously they left, so you didn't get the retention point. So 2 times 0 in anybody's book, basic math again, is a big fat goose egg. That is 0. you are 0 of 4, and it's really not going to help you in calculating your APR. So let's back up. Semester total, if you add all that up, that's 158. That's your 150 plus your 3 plus your 5 plus your 0. 150, but you had a total of 170 points you could have got. So it's 158 of 170. APR calculation says that you do 158 divided by 170, which is 0.929. 0.929. Simply multiply that by 1,000, so you can get a nice whole number. And your APR for that year, based on what took place there, is 929. Below the threshold of 930, you are in trouble. And if this progresses, they have the ability to put you on sanctions, taking away scholarships or different levels that you have in these sanction that goes by. We won't get in that kind of level of conversation because our time is up. But that's a framework of what's going on there. And we'll get into a little more discussion of this next week, as I'm sure Charles and Mike will have some discussions. But as we get to the top of the hour here, just wanted to give everybody a little framework of what was going on for those that were asking questions about APR. How do you calculate it? How do you move forward with that information in terms of that? So without further ado, as we start to close out, I do want to make sure I give a parting shot in so many different ways, or things just wouldn't quite be right before we actually turn it over to those back in the studio.
Host of the HBCU Report, and right now you're inside the HBCU Sports Lab with my guy, all hail the dean of HBCU Sports. You know I named him that. Dr. Kenyatta Cavil, my guy. What's happening, man?
Ain't nobody hear that.
Hey, man, stop hating. Stop hating. Don't hate like that, man. Just don't do it. Again, we thank you all for joining us and hope you enjoyed the show. Obviously, tried to give you some information on the latest updates in terms of COVID-19 and how it's impacting college athletics and therefore HBCU sports. Also wanted to give you some information on APR, which a lot of people are dialoguing, and obviously wanted to give you a little more insight in just in terms of how you actually calculate the APR and give you more measure for those that just thought it was an academic component in terms of eligibility. It's a little more than that, a little more complicated to a nuances, but as you can see, as you break it down, if you get the expert people in there, you can deal with it and move forward with it. With that, I am Dr. Kenyatta Cavil. Dr. Cavill's Inside HBCU Sports Lab with Mike Washington, Charles Bishop, presented by THC Agency. I am Dr. Kenyatta Cavil, the Dean of the College of HBCU Sports with Mike Washington, Charles Bishop. As we come to a close, we hope you enjoyed our lecture today. As we talked about again, COVID-19, HBCU athletics, and APR academic progress report for NCAA Division 1. Again, we want to thank you for listening to Dr. Bill's Inside HBCU Sports Lab with Mike Washington, Charles Bishop, every Tuesday right here from 6 to 7, right here on KCOH 1230 AM, Houston, Texas. Follow me, Dr. Kenyatta Cavil, on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Dream big, and we will continue to move forward. We will talk with you soon. Course lecture dismissed.
I love my HBCU. And boy,
Are you hungry for authentic Caribbean food like jerk chicken, oxtail, red snapper, shrimp, tofu, and rasta pasta? Well, find your way over to Mango's Caribbean Restaurant, 180 Auburn Avenue, right next to Royal Peacock in downtown Atlanta.
Them belly full, but we hungry.
Mango's Caribbean Restaurant, open daily from 11 a.m. to 10 p.m. And on Friday and Saturday, we're open till 4 a.m. Come to Mango's and put some spice in your life.
Oh, we've got a good thing going.
Mango's Caribbean Restaurant, 180 Auburn Avenue, right next to Royal Peacock in downtown Atlanta. For more info or directions, call 404-698-3992 or log on to mangoscaribbeanrestaurant.com. For instant coupons, text MANGOS to 313131.
Tell your mama hungry, papa hungry, brother